Hey, ladies and gents, welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, episode 100. We made it. As always, I'm joined by Jordan.
May the force be with us, gentlemen.
And Dom.
We are a century old.
Century.
That's not how that works.
That's not 100 years, yeah.
Episode 100, though, nonetheless.
Yeah, episode 100. This is actually being pre-recorded. So if you're wondering why we're not talking about certain things, it's because this happened in the past and we're bringing it to you in the future. Because that's how that works.
Time travel.
Whoa!
Yeah, we wanted to have all three of us here for sure for episode 100. So, we're just going to be going over the podcast and talking about things we loved about doing it, and just various things about doing the podcast in general. I guess first off, what I wanted to talk about is like initially starting the podcast. So we're 100 episodes in. When I initially started the podcast, I had wanted to do something with a group of people for a while. I had been making YouTube videos and doing random stuff for a long time. And just like you guys, which you guys have probably mentioned, it's hard to find people to talk about video games at a certain level. Usually a lot of times when you have conversations with friends, it's very surface level, talking about like, oh, did you see the new X got a trailer? Is that game coming out later this year? At best, yeah. At best. So basically, through Kind of Funny, I realized that their Facebook group, though I don't really use Facebook a whole lot, outside of like messaging and checking maybe the Kind of Funny group here and there, I saw that they had a lot of people that were interested in creating content and were just looking for people to do it with. So I essentially, and I don't remember the exact events, but I know I went in there and I was like, hey, I want to make a podcast. Anybody who's interested, just get in touch with me and I'll get in touch with you. And I kind of had like an email kind of questionnaire thing, just kind of trying to get a read for people, because even though people are really into video games, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll gel well with your personality or the type of thing you want to do in terms of content. Another big thing for me was finding people who were dedicated, and that's a huge thing for me. As you can see, we made it to 100 episodes, which is great. People are down to do something out of the gate, but a lot of times it's hard to find people that are consistent and committed to something. And it's not like we're getting hundreds of thousands of views or anything crazy like that, but I genuinely think, and you guys can say if it's the same case, I do this because I really enjoy doing it every week. It's something that's just a consistent, yeah. And I just like talking about video games with you guys, and you guys have grown to be friends to me, and we're just these random guys that I hoped a podcast would work out with. Yeah, there was the funny thing with...
So...
Real quick.
Actually, the reason I do it, there's a alien overlord just off screen that you're unable to see, but he basically has a force field around my body at all times, and if I don't do what he wishes, well, he could just explode me from the inside out. Basically, all my internal organs would individually explode, creating a chain reaction that eventually renders me ended.
That sounds like the, is it Fantastic Four or like Incredibles, or whoever has like the power to create force fields, right? Like, once makes the threat, like, well, I'm going to put a force field inside you and just expand it until you burst from the inside. I don't know. That's what you just reminded me of. Fucking dark.
Basically, yeah. He's not the nicest guy, and so I continue to do this podcast for his pleasure.
The thing I wanted to touch on real quick before I want to hear your guys' thoughts about initially getting started and obviously contacting some random dude who's trying to start a video game podcast is there was a lot of people who were interested. A lot of people. I think the final count for the number of like submissions I got was like 20 something, low 20s, probably like 22 or 21. I don't remember the exact number.
Fucking special, Dom. We're so special.
A lot of them, there was a huge age gap either way, and that was kind of hard. There was a bunch of kids who were really younger that I felt that wouldn't mesh well. There was a lot of people who were way older.
They're like, bro, do you love mobile games, bro?
God. Hey, Fortnite, man. There was a lot of people who were way older, and though they were like, pretty intelligent and knew how to conversate about video games and stuff, just the gap in interest there, I could see a lot of them were interested in talking about older games, like older games, and that's just something that I wasn't interested in terms of having a podcast. I wanted to get people around my same age, though I am a little bit older than you guys, just on that same wavelength. Yeah,
it's a bummer we had to turn down Jared Petty for that reason, but
I was gonna say, it's well known that Jared is not the biggest fan of Jared Petty, mostly because he stole his first name. But other than that,
exactly, he spells it differently.
I think
but
he doesn't like all the retro.
I don't dislike Jared Petty. I'm just not a huge fan of his opinions and stuff. Yeah.
He's
you
always
said
like,
that he seems like a genuinely mean person, and I was like, I don't know, he seems all right to me.
I don't know if anybody could ever say that about Jared Petty. It'd be like opposite day. Anyways, from your guys' perspective, because obviously I only have my own, what was it like seeing some random person post that they wanted to start a podcast, and like what made you send me a message saying you were interested in like go forth with doing the podcast and stuff?
Honestly, I was just trying to get some dick.
Jesus Christ.
Couldn't hold it. I wanted to hold it, man.
Jesus. God, I was not expecting those group of words together. Oh my God.
You should, after 100 episodes, know to expect the unexpected with yours truly. But I think it basically comes down to really what you just said, which is probably one of the reasons that we're able to gel, which is that, locally there just aren't enough people to talk about video games with, and there kind of are, like you were saying, Jared, but it's like, oh, did you see this new giant game that everybody was already going to fucking play coming out later? It's like, yeah, this is not stimulating conversation for someone who is really deep into the video game scene, and not only what's happening on the screen, but also what's happening behind the scenes with the developers, publishers, the hardware manufacturers. There's very few people, just in general, that can have those conversations, and that want to have those conversations, I guess. So that was what I was excited about, is that we could connect on that level and be able to have those discussions without me having to like almost censor myself just because I knew that this person wasn't going to talk about like some, basically like the fucking CPU on the PS4 Pro or whatever. So
yeah,
I'm right along with you. It's about finding that conversation mostly that you don't get anywhere else. Finding like, it sounds corny, but like the people that like your niche that you fit in with best. And then I think, like you mentioned, we're all like on the same wavelength. We're pretty close in like what the goals and what we want out of doing this as well. Like we all want same kind of to have some kind of structure around what we're doing. Like we're not just getting on a Skype call together,
exactly,
chatting, which would fulfill that need for conversation. But it's also like we do want to put some structure around this, and Jared does the lion's share of the work and the editing and design and everything. But still, like we all want to have this published and start to build a little something too. The biggest part, like this is something that would be easy to come together and start, and go for a few weeks and then kind of fizzle out. But yeah, the fact that we've gotten into 100 episodes, I think kind of says, enough about that. We're all really into this, which I think is pretty cool. So
yeah.
Ride or fucking die, bitches.
And the interesting thing too is, I don't know how much content creation. I know people love that phrase. Content creation you guys did on the internet before doing this, but for me, one of the hardest things about doing something online that isn't getting necessarily the views you want or the exposure you want is it's great to build like a portfolio or like just get the practice and stuff, which is fine and it's great and you should do that and do it because you enjoy it. But it's a lot easier to do something that's not necessarily getting the exposure with a group of people instead of alone. You know what I mean? Because at least you have those relationships there and you're building something, whether it eventually becomes something or not, at least there's something being built out of it. Whereas if you're doing something on your own, it feels very isolating and it doesn't, and it's harder, and with this, it's easier because for me, I feel that I have a commitment to you two to make sure to be on it every week and make sure to get stuff done, because not only do I owe it to myself, it's something that I personally want to deliver and do every week and enjoy doing. It's something that you guys do too, so I actually appreciate for lack of a better term, the burden of it. You know what I mean? It's not like weighing me down or anything, but I like that I'm committed to doing this because I owe it to both of you as well as myself. I appreciate that. It's a lot better to do that for me and the way I work than it to be like a sole project kind of thing.
Well, I mean, we mentioned this right before the show. You were talking about doing a new graphics package, and I said, Jared, you're a peach. And it's kind of sounded like a goofy thing to say, but I was being very serious at the same time because our graphics do look great. You kind of have a background there, so you know what you're doing. Yeah, and so Dom and I never have to worry about that, and I know I can speak for Dom when I say that it is very appreciated on our end that there's so much that you take care of, just kind of like a quality control perspective, and then the reliability, the dependability, and then I mean these graphics are really top notch. So all of that stuff is we obviously aren't talking about it constantly, but I know that we do appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's awesome to hear, and I know you guys do appreciate it. And for me, I hated using the word burden because it usually has a negative connotation to it, but I do appreciate that. And for me, I'm just like I hate to be like talking about myself and stuff, but for me, I'm like a natural born leader. So I like whenever I go into a project or go into things, I like to be the person in charge of things. It's just a personality. I'm a very A-type personality that way. So for me, I like being in charge of things and like doing all this stuff. But I do like that I have other people that are committed to this as well. You know what I mean? It's a joint venture by all of us. I guess the other thing I want to talk about is like initial impressions with everybody, because it's one thing for me to like get in contact with people and be like, I want to do a podcast with people and kind of get your gaming interests and figure that stuff out. When I started talking to people, I don't remember if I did this with you two or not, but I remember that I would do like 10-minute little talks with people on Skype. Did I do that with you guys as well? Just like a brief, not an interview. I guess it's technically an interview.
Yeah, sure.
It was just kind of, that's another thing, is it's a general fill out kind of thing of, you can write things on paper that I agree with or gel with, and you can seem in written word somebody that I gel with, but unless I actually have a real conversation with you, that's the whole point of a podcast, is us having a back and forth. And there were people that were, and I hate to make it sound like this because it isn't like a super special group of people, like it wasn't like super excluded or anything, but there was a narrowing down process of figuring out the people that I definitely want to do the podcast with. And there were people that were like in that last echelon of, oh, this is a possibility. And when it came to just talking with them, it just didn't feel right. There wasn't that natural pattern of conversation. There was some people that didn't gel. I don't want to say necessarily politically, but this is kind of a tough thing to talk about too, but if you do a podcast, right? Say we did a podcast and we got big. The last thing I want is for one of the people I do a podcast with, for people to end up finding out through his past of like social media or something that like he's like a Nazi or like, you know, something crazy.
Or even like something dumb. Oh man, that quarterback that got drafted, and they like looked up his tweets from high school and he's dropping the N-bomb and stuff, and it's like,
yeah, he was posting lyrics to songs. Was it dumb of him? Yeah. Was it racist? Not necessarily, not overtly.
Just ignorant, probably. But.
Yeah, and there's a fine line there. I mean, it's not me saying that like I didn't want people who were opposite of my political views or anything like that. It's just I didn't want terrible people. You know what I mean? There's like a difference there.
Right. You would hate to get into this situation and then, you know, find out down the road that
I hate that you're smiling.
Somebody thinks that Friends is better than Seinfeld.
That'd be horrible to find
that could be crushing.
Yeah.
That could honestly crush you.
Yeah.
Or that they don't like Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like they've never been around DBZ and they don't know who Piccolo and Vegeta are, and it's like, who the fuck are you and how are you still on this podcast? I mean, at the very least, they would have seen Infinity War by this point. Am I right? I mean,
and I
hope I'm not describing a monster right
and
now.
two people who aren't the largest fans of Uncharted, when you seem like one of the biggest Uncharted fans there is. I remember that was a funny thing when you first started the podcast, is like, you were like, Uncharted, and Jordan and I were like, Uncharted, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it exists. Yeah.
But overall,
but the thing is at least I still have a very deep love for Naughty Dog.
Yeah.
I think that's honestly, just a little tangent here, I think that's why I'm so hard on Uncharted, is because it's like, dude, Naughty Dog, you've been one of my favorite studios forever, and you're the reason I'm so into PlayStation, one of the reasons I'm so into video games. So, you know, tighten up them bullet firings a little bit.
Yeah, and it's good though, because I also got two people, and I think we're a group of people that can dislike something but not overtly hate on something, and I think that's something that, especially with the more, for lack of a better term, amateur-ish gaming podcasts, a lot of times it's very hate-filled or ignorant in some manner of like, this thing is dumb, this thing is dumb. But I think we do a really good job of navigating the conversations and turning them not necessarily in an optimistic viewpoint, but in a realist viewpoint of talking about the positives and negatives, everything that comes with it. I feel that I do a pretty good job of when I don't agree with something or it's something I don't necessarily like. I'm good at talking about the positives in it anyways, and I think all of us kind of do that in a great way. Even if it's something.
Well, we have varying opinions on games, and we disagree all the time, but it never ends in a bloodbath.
Well, exactly, because people can have different opinions, and you can still be friends. That's how the
it
world
starts
works.
with like, if we don't like lead off something with the preface of, I thought that, this gameplay in Uncharted was sloppy, yada yada. If we don't lead off with that preface of, I feel like it's always, it still comes across as like, we're never talking in terms of like our opinion is the end all be all matter of fact truth.
Yeah.
Right. We're always,
except for me.
We're always conscious of that in our tones and the way we talk. So yeah.
Going to that too, I love that we can have very serious conversations about like maybe stuff that happened with Quantic Dream or all different studios, or just things that aren't that great or people are kind of don't want to talk about. But then we can also have really dumb, hilarious, comedic conversations about random things too. I think that's really, really.
I can be looking for dick and not have to worry about it.
Exactly. I think that's really cool that we can have both of those conversations and we can approach those the way we need to, right? We don't necessarily have to have a super straight man during the funny conversations, and we don't have somebody just trying to ruin having a serious conversation because they feel uncomfortable in that. And I think that's really cool. One of the other things
to answer that question that you were about to ask before I interrupted. There's so actually two things. That actually just brought something up for me. So I'll ask my original question second. Real quick, let's talk a little bit about the experience of doing this online as opposed to in person and how that's affected us. Because we've talked about, there was one time where I was apologizing to you guys for interrupting because I felt bad about it, and even when it happens now, I still kind of feel bad about it just because it sucks. But you guys both assured me, like, no, we're on the internet and there's a delay on Skype, and it's not necessarily something you can help. And so I know there's been times, especially I think with Dom and I, where we'll start something and stop because we're interrupting each other, and so then we're both like, I guess I should go. So we jump back in and we both jump in at the same time again, and so it's like being in the hallway with somebody and like trying to get around.
Or four-way stop.
And then you just hear the squeaky sneakers on the floor. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a natural issue with recording online. It's going to happen. That's why I don't take it to heart. If we were doing this in person and we constantly interrupted each other, then I think there would be an issue there. But we're over the internet. It's weird. It's like something that even though, like specifically you said you and Dom, you two can, for people listening, when we record, they can see each other and they can see themselves, but there is a delay and there is stuff like that. And in person, it's just like this natural thing with conversating, at least if you're good at communication, that you can kind of read when somebody's finished their point and then you speak. And that's something that you lose doing it online. So it's not something I ever take to heart or anything. It literally just happened, and I have no issue with it because it's just, it's a part of doing this online, so. Yeah.
Another thing is never having met each other and gently caressed each other's face, which I plan on hopefully being able to do at some point in the future. Because I think it's obvious by now I'm in the Nashville area, Jared's out in New Mexico, and Dom's in Michigan. So
a triangle across the United States.
Right, we're nowhere close. It's not like, well, I could get in the car for 2 hours and at least go hang out with you for a little bit. Like, no, we're absolutely
quick 2-hour trip,
far away from each other. So yeah, hopefully, eventually we'll get around to hanging out. Hopefully, all at the same time. Little camp-controlled interests, if you will. But that is something that I think about how, there's people that in real life that I'm around that I'm like not as close with as I am with you two, but I could caress their cheek if I chose to do so, and they gave me consent.
Exactly. And that's just, I think that's a product of, if we were 3 guys in our mid-30s doing this, I think we would have a lot more expendable income, and it's like we'd have a lot easier way of planning that stuff out. I mean, we're kind of in like the early stages of our life where we're trying to figure stuff out, and we don't really have a whole lot of expendable income, and we're trying to figure out what to do. So that's not a huge hang up on me. I mean, it's crazy enough that we've built this friendship through simply just talking on the internet, which is really great, even though our parents half the time don't believe that that's something that can be done. The internet's dangerous. There's strangers out there that want to give you candy.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. Whether that's at like a convention that all of us can make it to, or however it happens to be, I think that's a product. Just like the interrupting is a product of us doing this online, I think us not having the opportunity yet is a product of where each of us are in our life at this point. Of like, it's not as easy of a thing, but I think that'll eventually happen and it'll work itself out. I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about is I have a couple of other things I want to talk about, but one of them is, did you guys, like, when we first started this, and this kind of goes with consistency and commitment, did you honestly think that we would make it to 100 episodes? It's not necessarily that we wouldn't make it to 100, but it probably wasn't anything that you guys were thinking about, right? Of like, I'm going to do this podcast for 100 episodes. And that's 100, not even counting all of the... We produce 5 individual E3 podcasts, so that's another 20 or 10, plus all the other stuff we've recorded. Like, 100 episodes is no laughing matter. Whether or not we're huge or not, doing something 100 times is pretty impressive, week in and week out. We've missed some weeks due to stuff, but like reaching 100 episodes is pretty impressive. So,
yeah, I didn't think that far ahead at all. Yeah, it was just, I was like, let's do this. Like, I was excited. I was like, oh yeah, these guys seem cool. Like, let's do this. This will be fun. Let's see what we can do here. I did not think this far ahead in the slightest. So.
Yeah.
I would say just about the same. I mean, I just kind of felt like come what may, which is kind of how I handle things just in general in life. But I just enjoyed doing it and continued to enjoy doing it, so continued to do it. And, I think it's definitely flown by. I will say that whenever I think about the fact that it's been a little over 2 years at this point, it is pretty crazy. And we've talked about the fact that we aren't anything huge on the internet, but I like it for having kind of an archive of my thoughts on not only games, but of course you guys know I talk a lot about all different kinds of media on here, whether it be comics, movies, TV shows. Music is actually something that I don't usually bring up, but yeah, it's something that I can go back years from now and look at and what did I think of Far Cry 5
in the
when
moment,
it came out, or God of War PS4, right? Yeah, because your thoughts will change over time, so I appreciate having that.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to, we mentioned this way earlier of like not having people to talk to. Before, I would read all of this gaming news or watch podcasts or listen to stuff, and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's interesting, and I'd go and start talking to my friends, and I'd mention it, and like they would show like casual interest because they're my friends and they don't want to be a-holes about it, but like you knew that after the mentioning of it, that conversation wasn't going anywhere. Even to this day, whenever I mention stuff, they're like, oh, interested. I'm like, oh, they announced this game and this, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, if you didn't realize, they're the people that made this game, and then the thing clicks, and they're like, oh, okay, but it's always like a one-sided conversation. I'm always the person bringing that information to people. I don't have anything to bounce off of, you know what I mean? So that's what I appreciate with this podcast, is not only is it a weekly thing where I get to talk to you guys, just period, I get to gather up all the news and be like, oh, we get to talk about this stuff, and have somebody I can talk to about it that understands the dynamics of why this is important, or why this doesn't matter, or why this does matter. I think that's really cool. I just think 100 episodes is impressive any way you cut it, and to make it this far, I've seen plenty of things start off and not even get to episode 100. It's just cool to see that, because that shows consistency, right? And I think, too, to the point is, if we ever do get to a point where we even reach a little bit of notoriety, having a podcast that has lasted as long as ours already has shows people that we are committed to this. We have been doing this for a while. If people jump in and they're like, oh, I'm on podcast 135 or 150, whatever, like, they've already done 150 of these podcasts. They've been doing this in and out, you know what I mean? So I think it's really cool.
Something that's worth mentioning, not that we're sitting here all boo-hoo that we don't have a giant following, but there's a lot of people out there that would be very excited to be able to have a podcast that doesn't really have a following. There's a lot bigger people on the internet that would damn near kill in order to be able to just have an online conversation and not have floods of people, both positive and negative, trying to talk with them. So there's something to be said for the fact that we don't have to deal with all of those different situations that arise when you have thousands of people following your stuff online.
Yeah. Also, I mean, to that point, too, there's people that wish that they just had a podcast to do with other people that would last 100 episodes. So even if we don't have the following, I'm glad that we've been able to do this as long as we have. I guess the last thing I want to touch on before we get into a question that Dom had an idea for, what's your guys' like, I guess we've partially touched on it, but what's your favorite part about doing the podcast? For me, I think my favorite part is the E3 predictions we do every year. I love those just because though they're not like crazy stakes or there's like something crazy good for the winner or crazy bad for the loser, I just like having a group of people that I can talk to and make predictions about these big events in the gaming world and see where we land in terms of getting it right and wrong. And I also love that we bring in guests as well, because we do have a diverse group of people giving their thoughts on things, right? So, for instance, some of our past guests include Blessing and Logan and Max, and even recently Alex Van Aken and Chris Nunes. So each of them, like if we had Blessing on the PlayStation predictions, he would have a different approach in terms of what he thinks they're going to do than, say, if Logan was on it. And it just happens to be whoever's on that podcast, so I think it's really interesting.
I feel like I must interrupt you at this point to say, don't forget about our Easy Allies pal Ian Hink,
exactly.
who's been very good to us.
Even Michael Huber was on the episode once too, but he's a hard man to track down. So
right. Yeah, sure. That was actually when I had thought of the two questions a few minutes ago. That was what I was going to ask is, let's talk a little shit about these guests of ours, if you will.
God.
Jeez.
No, I just think that we've been blessed with... Wow, I didn't mean to... I'm going to talk about blessing now. No, we have been lucky to have some great dudes on here. There's no diversity, mostly just because we hate women. That's why Dom's married to one. Yeah, we've had some great dudes on here that, we've never had any issues with them. Same as we've never had any issues between each other, so it's really cool that that's been the case. As far as my favorite part of the podcast, I would say we haven't done this as much recently, mostly just because I haven't had any ideas for it, and we've just been focusing on other stuff. But something that I'm sure we'll get back into at some point and that we've done plenty of in the past is some of the much deeper topics where we're talking about, I remember there's one where I brought up simulation theory and how that, interacts with video games, or what the future of possibly arcades could be if they were brought back for VR purposes. Stuff where we're like really getting down to the nitty gritty and pouring out our thoughts on these things that don't usually get talked about in the video game industry, because most video game podcasts aren't about talking about deeper stuff on deeper levels in the industry. It's more just about, this game came out yesterday, and here's our review score for this, and what's the latest PlayStation exclusive. So I really enjoy those discussions that we have.
Yeah. The E3 predictions or any other predictions are always that would be an easy pick, as well as reflecting on E3. Those are always good talks too. I think if I were to say one thing in particular that I like the most, though, and it's kind of looking forward to a certain conversation. So the most recent example being last week, all week I cannot wait to talk to Jordan about God of War, right? That was something I legit was looking forward to specifically, all the way up until that Thursday, right? So same thing back with Uncharted and whatever else, whatever other games there are, and nowadays it's Wolfenstein, but Jared's ass won't play the game.
Infinity War.
And then, Infinity War is the reverse scenario there. But yeah, so looking forward to specific conversations of, we all played this thing or watched this thing, and you can have an in-depth conversation about what'd you think of this and what'd you think of that. We still have about half of that conversation still to be had for God of War, by the way, when you're done.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's something I point out. That's always what I look forward to the most. Those are definitely the episodes where I'm like, oh man, got this specific thing I can't wait to fucking talk about.
It's funny that you mentioned that too.
Yeah.
So when I was looking for people who wanted to be a part of the podcast and stuff, another thing I was afraid of is people who were yes men or people who didn't really talk a whole lot. And the last thing I wanted was to have a podcast where I talked and talked and talked and talked, and all the other person would say is like, yeah, or sure, or whatever, right? And I'm glad that like last week of pre-recording this, during that God of War conversation, I didn't talk for like a good 25 minutes, and I loved that because I was just listening to you guys talk about God of War.
Because you don't know shit about God of War.
Exactly.
Because this is, and I'm going to say this now, and this is a pretty bold statement. This game is, I think, without a doubt, the best game of this generation. Maybe the past few generations. I'm not going to go quite that far.
I'm going to
certainly.
Jesus fucking Christ!
You don't have to
Certainly so far.
Yeah.
This generation, I think this is the best game that's come out, and that means I think it's better than The Witcher 3, better than Bloodborne, better than Horizon Zero Dawn.
I don't know about that.
Breath of the Wild.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I'm putting it up there. So
certainly better than Breath of the Wild, no question there.
Yeah, I guess there's not really much else. So you mentioned not having a girl on as a guest. That's one thing that kind of sucks with video games in general. Is like it's hard to find people that like want to engage. And one of the funny things is
it's all hot boys and not enough gamer girls.
Exactly. When I was looking sorry, go ahead, Dom.
I think I know what you were going to say, though. The numbers are, heavier on the male side, obviously, in this, in this community, industry, yada yada. But also that, the girls that are here probably don't like speaking up too much or, making it known because they don't get treated all that well often. So
sure.
Yeah,
that's probably part of it.
Because a lot of times in part of a gaming community, you have people who aren't necessarily, in tune with how to handle those type of situations and may come on a little strong. Not a lot of times.
Very well said, Jared.
Not a lot of times to be like vile or be overbearing. It's just they're not very good socially. So in turn, that leads to that whole situation. The funny thing though is, so my initial plan was I've always wanted 3 main people. I thought 4 was a little much. I like when we have a guest on, and 4 is fine. But like I didn't want 4 as a mainstay because then if we had a guest, that'd be 5 people. It's a little much. But my initial plan was my dream was to have three people, and at least one of them was going to be a girl, because I know, like you guys have mentioned, I noticed in like podcasts and stuff, there isn't a lot of females. Like one of my big things was like I would love to have a female on the podcast because that isn't a perspective we get to hear a whole lot. Unfortunately, due to the way things played out, there wasn't any women that wanted to do a podcast. But in turn, I got you two, so that's great. I'll trade that for any.
Yeah, no.
And with that, I'd like to go ahead and announce my transition into the female gender. You are required to refer to me as such, and we do now have...
Dodging all of that. Let's get to the next topic.
Well, no, really quick, though. I like that you bring that up, because we did at least have the opportunity to have a couple of chats with Blessing, and we got a little bit of a different perspective as,
See a girl now?
No, he's black, Jordan. Christ. But wait, he says,
I did not get that you were going down that road with him.
Well, and it's something I certainly, I didn't, when he brings certain things up, I'm like, oh, I guess I never really thought about that. So for example, when we talked about Far Cry 5 back before it came out, and he was like, oh yeah, it's kind of cool, like there's a Far Cry game where you're shooting, white people instead, not like white people, but people who aren't dark.
Yeah,
I guess
dark.
And
yeah.
you can, I'm probably not, I don't know if I'm saying this the right way, but I guess what he meant was like we're actually shooting white guys at the bad guys, not that they never are or whatever, but it's like
predominantly,
it was something that stuck out to him just from his perspective that I never would have had that perspective. Like,
exactly,
I never think about something like that as a fucking white dude, but I don't know. So we get a little bit of that, at least from that perspective. Yeah, it would be cooler to have a female perspective as well into some conversations, because when some of these opinions come out, like, oh, well, why can't you custom create a girl character and this and that, and like we hear some complaints, and I'm like, who the fuck cares? That's dumb. Why do we need that? But it's like, well, I'm also not a girl, so it's like,
which funny enough, in every
to be excluded
in every non-RPG game, I always pick a female character. So PUBG, I have a female character. GTA Online, I have a female character. And the reason I do this is because a lot of times in games, they have smaller hitboxes. So in PUBG, the female character has a smaller hitbox than the So it's actually an
Jared's
competitive
on
advantage.
point.
Wow.
I do that. I always choose female
Also, like,
characters when.
I was just gonna say also like. I think it's more pleasant to like look at a female than it is to look at like some hardened dude the entire time. It's like if I want to look at a dude, I'll just look in the mirror. Like, you know what I mean? It depends on the game, though.
That is a thing.
Yeah.
I do choose females though, just because I didn't even think of the hitbox thing, which is very smart, Jared. But I just choose females because that balances out the amount of games where I play as a female protagonist.
Exactly.
You know, if
It
for
is
all
rare.
the Mass Effect Andromedas and Dragon Age Inquisitions I'm playing as a female, then it means that I'm playing that many less as just another generic dude. So I do appreciate that.
Also, it brings like a sense of fresh air. I think a lot of times too of like, I think most of the time you play as a male character in a game, you know, and to have the choice, it's something like, yeah, sure, I'll play as a female through this game. It's not really like a crazy thought. It's just like, sure, why not? I'll play as a female mage in Skyrim or whatever, you know. It's not really anything.
Right, and I mean, it can even be to benefit, like Fim Shep in the original Mass Effect trilogy is easily the better of the two voice actors.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
So, you know, it can be to your benefit a lot of times.
Agreed. So this is something that Dom brought up before that we could end the show on before we close out episode 100, which once again, it's crazy to think that we made it this far. What is the game that we wish existed? Now, the way you kind of brought it up, Dom, is you said it could be something realistic or unrealistic. For me personally, I'm going to approach it in like a scenario that could possibly happen. And for me, Jordan may be on the same track, but I really think that we need more like super quality superhero games. Obviously, we're getting Spider-Man, which is my most anticipated game, even more so than Red Dead 2, which I'm excited for Red Dead 2, but like, oh man, I'm so excited for Spider-Man.
Trailer was awesome for Red Dead, by the way.
Yeah,
I could totally see Spider-Man kicking off a whole new wave of superhero games that we aren't getting. I honestly think the reason is because of the way licensed games have been almost like banned from the industry at this point because of the way that they were treating those licenses, the publishers specifically. And so fortunately we had people picking up the slack, like shout out to Insomniac, obviously making not Insomniac making Sucker Punch, Insomniac making Sunset Overdrive, and then of course Sony's best internal studio, Sucker Punch, making the Infamous games.
So Marvel Games actually has Bill Roseman in charge, and
there you go.
Since early last year, he said that they're committed to rejuvenating the Marvel brand in video games. And I think what probably honestly happened is that Marvel sees how successful their movies are in terms of pure numbers and profit, and they're like, "Why? Video games are huge. Why aren't we tackling this? We have mobile games. Like, why aren't we tackling this?" And there was probably that conversation of, well, the licensed games just got to a point where they weren't selling to the numbers that we wanted, and they're like, oh, well, the industry is different now. So Bill Roseman came in and he's like, we have to have a different approach this time. We need to go to these AAA developers and have them make quality games. We'll be producing less games over time, but they'll be of higher quality and probably sell better. And I think obviously that's when the Insomniac pitch came up and the Square Enix Avengers deal came up. And I think we could slowly start to come into this golden age of superhero games. We have Spider-Man, we have Avengers on the horizon. Hopefully that's good. It's being developed by Crystal Dynamics, who, though the Tomb Raider games weren't 10s, they were very solid games. So I'm interested to see what they do there.
Oh yeah,
especially with the help of the other studios. And we have Rocksteady and WB Montreal, who have created some great games, and we don't know what they've been working on. And hopefully we see that soon. Like I said, this is pre-recorded.
Fucking
maybe we know
for real, man.
Yeah, maybe we know what they're working on at the point of this coming out. But for me, I guess to get to the question of what game do I wish existed, my favorite superhero, bar none, is the Hulk. I don't think you can make a standalone. Yeah, I don't think you can make a standalone Hulk game that's interesting enough. I don't think somebody would be willing to tackle it, because to make a Hulk game interesting, you have to make it where a part of the game is Bruce Banner and that narrative. And I think when people approach a Hulk game, they're all about the destruction. And though that's cool doing in a video game, I do think you need to balance that out to make a quality game. So I don't think that'll ever happen. I don't think somebody would be willing enough to approach it that way. Some of the other heroes I love are obviously X-23, which is Logan's clone.
Fuck yeah, dude.
I would love just an action game with her. Just like a beat 'em up.
Fuck yeah.
I would love God of War definitely gives me the vibe of, obviously he has an axe and he pulls it back to him and stuff, but that kind of changes my perspective for a linear type game. God of War is linear, but there obviously are open areas where you can explore and stuff. It reminds me a lot of, like I've mentioned before,
Right.
Tomb Raider. I would love to have a Wolverine game that's makes the combat feel the way God of War seems to make it feel, and though it's not perfect, just that it feels very intimate. There aren't huge hordes of enemies, but it seems like in the way Huber would say, feel the kill. I think that's something, especially in a Wolverine game, that's very important, and I would love that. I have my hopes up for the Avengers game. I would love for that Avengers game to come out, and then people see the success of Spider-Man, and us get these. Maybe Square Enix is in charge of the big team-up games, but we have these people take on these individual projects for a Spider-Man game or a Wolverine game or even just an X-Men game in general. And I want to see...
Well, you're talking about God of War. You got to mention a Thor game, right? That would be awesome.
A Thor game would be cool, especially with the rejuvenated popularity of the Thor character. They made him a lot cooler and a lot funnier in Thor Ragnarok. Though we have our opinions on Ragnarok, I think to the general audience, Thor is just generally a cooler character from where he was in Thor Dark World and even Avengers. Just his look is a lot cooler and translates better to video games. For me, I think I want... Spider-Man is a big open world game, which makes sense for that character. I guess my next dream game is a more intimate, focused superhero game for a specific hero. So maybe linear like God of War is, but a lot more visceral and closed in and not the open world that Spider-Man is. And I don't know what hero that would be. Like I said, Wolverine's a good thing for that. There's maybe a couple other characters you can choose, but I want to see the Sony Last of Us God of War, but for a superhero game. Not necessarily copy cutter that, but like a more linear narrative driven superhero game. That'd be really cool to see.
I think, well, it's not linear, but I definitely think you're going to get that with Spider-Man. I think you're going to have a great narrative there.
Yeah.
Obviously, Insomniac has the clout to do that. Just building off of a couple things that you said, obviously my favorite hero is Batman, and I have some amazing games to play from Rocksteady there. But my favorite Marvel hero is Iron Man. And, back when the original movie of his came out, I was really hoping that game would be good. And I had a little bit of fun with it. It's just fun to fly around and shoot repulsors at people or whatever. But I would really like, and he'll be in the Avengers game, but it would be cool to have a solo Iron Man game where you're just doing his thing. I've been reading Avengers vs. X-Men, the comic series from several years back, and he's just such a fucking cool character. And with what we saw in Infinity War, with it being his nanotech suit from some of the most recent comics, which I fucking love. I'm so glad they brought that into the MCU. He can kind of just create things on the fly, so a shield or a sword coming out of his arm, all different kinds of stuff can be created, and it would be really great to have those as like upgradable abilities in an Iron Man game. Yeah,
that's what I'm interested in. The Avengers game is we've assumed that it's going to be the different characters and you control them, and that's a hard thing to do because Hulk controls way differently than Iron Man, and it's going to be interesting to see how that fits and how polished in AAA it is. The Iron Man game would be fantastic.
I hope they just do four heroes, and that'll make it easier on them to have varying styles of gameplay, but still really focus on just 4 instead of 6 or 8, whatever.
Yeah.
But obviously we'll see. Real quick, huge shout out to Hulk Ultimate Destruction on the PS2 generation, which was fucking dope, even though it is kind of what you're saying, Jared. Everybody always just focuses on the destruction, which is that game is all about.
Yeah, it's fun, but the type of Hulk game I would want, I don't think anybody is willing to do that. Same thing is the reason we don't have a standalone Hulk movie is because Universal owned the rights. But even if they did do a Hulk movie, they always tend to focus on the Hulk part of it, and not necessarily the Bruce Banner part of it. And a lot of the Bruce Banner stuff is really interesting and is super dark. And I just don't think they'd ever touch on that, especially with Disney.
Well, it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Exactly. Yeah, Dom, you're the one that brought this up. What would your dream, I guess, game be? I guess we're more in the realm of reality, but
yeah, and this was my question, but I probably have the lamest answers. The first thing that comes to mind and is another Bloodborne game, but the more I think about it, I'm thinking, I do want that, but I'm okay waiting and letting the anticipation build up a little more. But I'm also kind of hesitant. Like, I don't really know what that looks like and how that differs from the first game. When you look at something like Dark Souls that has tons of DLC and 2 sequels and so on, they kind of have a bit more freedom. Like, they can create whatever different looking worlds they want and do whatever they want with characters and mechanics and different things. Whereas Bloodborne, they're kind of, I don't know too much about like Lovecraftian stories and that kind of stuff, but my worry is that how much exists in that kind of world, that like how different can they really make a sequel? And if they do make it too different,
there's a lot.
Can it? Yeah, would that be a bad thing if it got too weird?
I mean, think about Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. They're kind of
not at all.
They're kind of all in the same kind of tone and place, but they all feel drastically different. Yeah. So,
yeah.
While Jared dies, I was just gonna say that the Lovecraft, the Cthulhu mythos, if you will, there's a lot of shit they could do there. There is a lot, and dude, just the incredible story that they told with the original Bloodborne. I think there's so much more that can be told, and the Old Hunters was kind of that, where they're expanding upon it and did it really, really added to the lore and didn't like fuck anything up. So to be honest, I get more and more worried the further we get away from the original Bloodborne about the sequel. But you got to think that Sony wants that to happen, and it's their choice at the end of the day, since they own the IP.
I just hope it's done right.
I definitely feel like,
yeah.
I mean, I think Studio Japan could handle it. They're not. People think of them as Team Ico, and it takes them 20 fucking years to make a single game. But Team Ico is a part of Studio Japan. Studio Japan is, Gravity Rush and Gravity Rush 2. So, I definitely think they could handle it, especially since they helped on the original Bloodborne. So, I'm still a little worried, though. I mean, I know a lot of people have kind of, especially since we don't know what Shadows Die Twice is, and if that doesn't turn out to be Bloodborne, I know a lot of people are already kind of losing hope. So I'd love to see it.
I think it's got to happen eventually. My point was, or one of my points was, I'm okay with waiting. That's only going to make it that much more satisfying when it does come out. Like, if that's a PS5 thing, then so be it. That's all right with me. Plenty to do in the meantime.
PS5 launch title.
Yeah. That's the first thing that comes up. The other obvious one for me is a like ground up, and this is probably more on the impossible side, but is a ground up remaster, or rather remake, of Ocarina of Time for the Switch specifically.
Okay, I keep hearing about this. Do people not realize that they just did that shit on the 3DS and it's fucking awesome?
Which is
and they did it with Majora's Mask as well. Like, if anything, they're just gonna port that. There's no way you could ask them to do to remake the same game twice in 10 years. That's kind of
definitely
ridiculous.
That's why I think it's almost certainly not going to happen. Because it was so recent that they just did that on 3DS. But I just wish they had done it on a console, because the 3DS version looks great. It looks really good. I want it like,
it's amazing.
It could look even better, a full like Unreal Engine type thing. And obviously the reason I think of this and I bring it up is because there's those YouTube clips of whatever that guy's name is who started to rebuild the game. And it's nothing.
Do that.
It's at best a tech demo what he has built, and he has some clips out there. And the animations are kind of garbage, but you get the idea of what it would look like if it were to be redone entirely. And it's just, oh man, that's the dream. So that almost certainly will not happen. Most likely we'll get virtual console version of it on Switch or something, if even that. But that's a whole other conversation.
So I have a couple of things I want to throw out, and then Jordan can go with his last thoughts on a dream video game. Real quick, Jordan, help me out. Help me out with the developer of Quantum Break and Alan Wake. The name's escaping me. Remedy. I would love to see Remedy do something licensed. I think I enjoyed Alan Wake. I loved Alan Wake. I loved Quantum Break. and their games just don't sell that well, which kind of sucks. We should be getting an announcement. Once again, we're pre-recording this, so it might have already happened.
Project 7
for P7. But I would love to see them tackle something. The other two things, or I guess there's a couple of things I want to talk about, is though From doesn't necessarily make the most like visually appealing, like their games don't look like God of War Horizon or whatever. But I would love to see them tackle
production value.
Well, I mean, I would say visual production. I think their game mechanics and stuff are untouchable in comparison to a lot of people. I would love to see them tackle Star Wars. Just lightsaber fighting, maybe just to some extent.
Damn.
I was gonna say it.
Damn.
I would just love to see that. The other one I have is, the Coalition is stuck making these Gears games, and I think to give them a break, but they did name their studio the Coalition. I would love to see a third-person Punisher game made by the Coalition. Yeah.
Fuck, that would be so dope.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I mean, you want to talk about production values, like Gears of War 4 was one of the prettiest games of this gen. It just looks beautiful with even the new 4K update for the Xbox One X. I think that they have the practice and the knowledge of making a third-person shooter, and they have that grit to them. Their games naturally have that grit, and I would love to see them tackle Punisher. I think it'd just be super dope.
Yeah. I just want to say, we mentioned a bunch of superhero games earlier, and I'm glad you brought up Quantum Break, because that is a fantastic superhero game, by the way.
Yeah. Help me out again, the name's escaping me. The studio that developed Ni no Kuni and Ni no Kuni 2. Level 5? No, that's wrong.
Yep. Nope, you're right.
Okay, I just wasn't sure.
Level
I would
5.
love to see Level 5 and the Pokemon Company collaborate on the next Pokemon game.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the original Ni no Kuni has a lot of Pokemon in it with your familiars and stuff, so that would be dope.
Just the artistic style of it, just so good. Yeah.
The last thing I was going to throw in, Jared, even just to be more vague, I just want something single-player narrative Star Wars. Something good.
Yeah.
And that, obviously...
I think EA was just... EA just told me to tell you.
The closest thing you're going to get to that is going to be the open world game. I don't think we'll see a linear story-driven game that's... I think the open world game is
even
in development.
Open world.
Yeah.
That's fine, too. As long as there is a strong narrative within it. That's
the
all
positive thing...
It almost happened twice, Dom. Fucking twice. You had...
Unbelievable.
1313... And then now you had Amy Hennig, Uncharted Star Wars, just obliterated.
The thing I want to say that's a positive, and is something a little bit more optimistic, is we don't exactly know what Respawn's game specifically is, and Titanfall 2 had one of the best shooter campaigns I have ever played. And it could be that their game is multiplayer focused, but they're probably going to include a single-player campaign. And I do think that could have the possibility of being really great, because Titanfall 2's campaign was really good. It's unfortunate that EA is like, let's release it here. That's a smart idea. I don't know how soon we're going to get the God of War equivalent, or The Last of Us, or the strict narrative games, linear narrative games for Star Wars. I don't think that'll be for a while.
Maybe ever.
Yeah, those are my last couple ideas. Level 5 with Pokemon, and Coalition with Gears. Any other things you want to throw up before we close out, Jordan?
So I'm so devastated about the Star Wars shit. That sucks so fucking bad. What sucks even worse, I could handle them taking the game and being like, oh, we're gonna kind of redo it with our I don't even remember which studio it was that they're saying is redoing it, Montreal or something like that, Edmonton. No, I'm thinking of BioWare. Anyways, I'd like to say just real quick, fuck EA, because they closed down one of the best development houses in the industry with Visceral Games, and they've done this time and again. That's we all know the story, but I'm very sad to see Visceral close down, because EA not only ravaged that studio, but also the franchise that made Visceral, because they were called EA Redwood before Dead Space 2, actually. So it's so sad, because my dream game would be Dead Space 4, and you don't have to call it that. It could be Dead Space, subtitle
Revival.
Or whatever. Dead Space Revival, Rebirth. But I would love to see them go back to those original mechanics, get away from the stuff in Dead Space 3 and even Dead Space 2, and I just want them to go back to the original vibes of Dead Space 1, because that game is something truly so fucking special. And the same I'd like to see with BioShock. We'll see what happens when this next BioShock comes out sooner or later. But it's not going to be a Ken Levine BioShock game, so I'm assuming that it's going to be more BioShock 2 than the original or even Infinite. But I'd love to see a return to the OG BioShock vibe.
Absolutely.
Two of my favorite games of all time there, the original BioShock and original Dead Space. So those are just a couple. We talked about some of the superhero games that I would love. I mean, I could honestly talk about superhero game ideas for fucking ever. But honestly, guys, a game that I have a dream of, and I swear to fucking God, if nobody's gonna get off their ass and make it, then I may just have to do it myself. You know, Thanos putting on the Infinity Gauntlet.
Jack X Racing, Jack X Combat Racing 2.
Close, but no dice. I think that you're never going to improve on the perfect game that is Jack X Combat Racing. It is actually a really dope game, and it's on PS4 now, so I would recommend it. But Jack 4, man. Jack fucking 4. And people cringe at the leaked stuff, or I don't even know if it was leaked. I think Naughty Dog actually put it out.
The concept art, right?
The concept art of Jack 4, Naughty Dog did originally start making it and go into some pre-production and stuff, but ended up scrapping the project. And I just think people are ridiculous talking all this shit about Jack and how it would never translate to today and how you couldn't do it today. Third-person action adventure games are, possibly at the peak of their existence right now. They've never been more popular before. All the superhero games that we're talking about would definitely be third-person action adventure. The biggest PlayStation exclusives, Spider-Man, God of War, Horizon, are all third-person action adventure. So I just don't get this bullshit that there's no way you could do an awesome Jack 4. And especially...
Sorry to interrupt you. I just thought about Jack on screen, and I forgot the actual name of the creature that Daxter turns into. But I just in the Kratos voice, being like, Oxel, like boy.
Yeah, Ottsel, Ottsel. But I don't think you make him look realistic like they were trying to do. That's why it makes so many people cringe. But there's so much to be done there. It's a very cool world. The character design is very cool, and especially with like some of the car combat stuff that they introduced in 3, and then of course Jack X. You could do a lot of stuff there, which is kind of the stuff that a lot of people really love about the Mad Max game from several years ago. And not only that, but Jack, a little bit of Jack 2. Well, actually, yeah, Jack 2, but especially Jack 3. Those were like precursors. Shout out to the Precursor Legacy, the original Jack game. But those were precursors to what we now know as the open world. So I don't think that it's impossible to translate that series into open world, since they were some of the first games doing it back on PlayStation 2. So, yeah, man, I just think people are bullshitting about that, and I'm tired of hearing people dump on Jack 4. I don't think it'll come around anytime soon, but I do think they actually did a 4th game that wasn't Jack X, that was on PSP, and then I think eventually made its way to PS3, called The Last Frontier. But it was, I haven't played it, but it doesn't seem like it was, living up to the splendor of the series. But yeah, I definitely think you could bring it back today and make something awesome out of it, and make something that people would totally love. So
I think the IP has a ton of clout. I could definitely see it coming back. On the surface, it could definitely read as, when people are looking at this in production meetings, it's, Chris Pratt, Star-Lord, and Rocket Raccoon. Obviously different personalities and stuff, but on the page, that sells. It's like, this funny main human character, this male, with this furry little comedic relief. Like, I definitely think it can work and be brought back.
Yeah. And you can make it M-rated, because the games got more violent as they went on. And of course, Daxter is kind of a a loudmouth, rough and tumble type of character, very similar to Rocket Raccoon. So yeah, I think you could make a really awesome M-rated open world shooter with like some Borderlands elements and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That would be really fucking cool. So, and yeah, I could definitely see Sony making it with a studio besides Naughty Dog, because people say that it would be a total waste of time and money for Naughty Dog to make another Jack game. I disagree, because I think it would push them to look back at their roots and realize what made them great in the first place. And those game mechanics are not rusty in Jack. They're very much on point, so I think it might kind of rattle them into making some sense, giving them some sense and being like, oh yeah, we did make mechanically super tight games back in the day at one point, and so we could balance that out with the great storytelling that we've been known for recently. So I would actually like to see them do that, because I think they could do something really cool with it, and maybe even improve as a studio in the long run.
Screw it, if you don't want to give it to Naughty Dog, give it to Bluepoint. Let that be their first, like, from the ground up original game. Obviously not original IP, but still. I guess before we close at episode 100, the last thing I want to say is, how are we in 2018 when we still don't have a AAA Game of Thrones or Harry Potter game? That's very odd to me, Like...
Yeah, I mean...
Especially Harry Potter.
I think you have... Yeah, you don't have a lot of great Wizard games, that's for sure, but you definitely have some Game of Thrones style games with Dragon Age and stuff like that. I think that those games are, it's tough to make a good licensed game, because you got so much that you have to work around.
That's why we'll never see Game of Thrones Season 2 for Telltale. Unfortunately.
Oh, God, don't even remind me. But besides that, it's just, different with Harry Potter, but with Game of Thrones, like, the sword fights, that's not the main point of the series. It's the political intrigue and the backstabbing type of stuff, which is hard to do in gameplay unless it is like a story game, such as the Telltale series. So I don't know. As far as Harry Potter goes, that's more of a mystery, though, because it's something that's has even more wide appeal than Game of Thrones, because any age could play it, and you could do awesome spells with your wand, and people have talked about turning it into like an MGS5 or Peace Walker situation, where you're like recruiting young wizards within Hogwarts and almost building like a Dumbledore's army type of thing. So there's a lot of potential there. It is kind of crazy that we don't have a big Harry Potter game.
I would love if the first 2 hours of the game were like Quantic Dream, Telltale-esque in terms of like decision making, and it's kind of like an open structure of you deciding one way or another to tackle like certain things, and all of those decisions you make feed into an algorithm that when you arrive at Hogwarts, it picks your house. That'd be pretty dope.
Stuff like that would be really awesome. On a side note, apparently the mobile game that's been released recently is fucking up all different types of canon. Yeah. Well, I didn't know about the microtransactions. I just keep hearing about how it's fucking up canon and how there's all these inconsistencies. So, if nothing else, I hope that that game just kind of opens the door for something bigger and better on consoles.
Yeah. Well, that does it for episode 100. It was great to look back and discuss, us starting the podcast and how we made it to 100 episodes and what we enjoy doing with it. Here's to 100 more, which is 2 years away, give or take, because obviously 52 weeks in a year. It's awesome that we made it to 100 episodes. We'll see you guys next week.
Neo-controlled interests 2020.
We'll see you guys next week when, depending on when this goes up, we'll probably be talking about E3 2018 or the like. Thank you guys again for joining me on this podcast for 100 episodes. Anything to say before we close out?
Seinfeld is better than Friends.
God of War, game of the generation.
Oh my God. Alrighty.
Jesus Christ.
Catch you guys.
Better than Witcher 3.
Catch you guys in episode 101. Bye.